This is Matt Harris with Verado, and today we have Paolo Vidali from Hidden Gears here to talk to us about his agency, what they do, and specifically Shopify, because my understanding is you guys do a lot of Shopify work and you have a lot of Shopify experience. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So there's been a lot of talk about, obviously, Shopify is the leader in e-commerce. Everyone should know that. But what are you seeing from your side on the evolution of Shopify, and in particular, how Shopify is working in the kind of more complicated builds, large SKUs, B2B? Why don't you give us some perspective from some of the work that you've done?
Sure, yeah. So for context, I've been developing for Shopify since 2009, so I was really early on the platform. At the time, I was working for a company that had 5 different brands and was working on pulling them out of all these weird legacy systems. This was about the mid-aughts, so e-commerce wasn't brand new, but I mean, it wasn't very accessible, even to developers in a certain way. I know you've been in the industry forever, so I know you remember these days. And at the time, Shopify was acceptable for kind of small brands, mom and pop. If you're DIY, if you had some time on the forums, you could kind of figure stuff out, and it was rudimentary. But the reason that I've sort of kept with the platform for so long is because they really have made very smart technical decisions in terms of scaling their platform, investing in tech, creating a scalable, hosted infrastructure, et cetera. So that's really why I've been able to stick with it. And in 2020, actually right before pandemic, we decided to take our agency from more of a platform agnostic shop to a Shopify only shop. And since then, we've been able to achieve a lot of different things. With the platform, still working with a few solopreneurs here and there, but really working with kind of growing businesses that are really facing challenges in scale, and working with Shopify, at least from an engineering perspective, and being on a managed hosted platform means that they don't at least worry about that. They don't worry about servers. They don't worry about hacking by and large. They have that infrastructure that's really robust, and they don't need to know about racks and hire an engineer just to do that. And so over the last few years, we've also done a lot with large catalog clients who are 10,000, 20,000 SKUs. Some of those folks are in jewelry, some are in home goods, or in more kind of industrial applications or agricultural applications. And so they have a lot of challenges that are specific to how the products either get into Shopify or need to be merchandised. A lot of product logic that's very complex. So we work with a merchant who has different types of freight that they sell, because they sell massively oversized items. So there's truck shipping, then you need some with a tailgate or forklift only. You have things that might be hazardous in certain states. You have all kinds of different conditions and subconditions, and you have to build out all this logic so that when someone buys something on the front end, they don't have any surprises, and also they don't get through if they shouldn't get through with a certain shipping rate or a certain shipping address, et cetera. And so I think traditionally a lot of folks didn't think of Shopify as a viable solution for these more complicated use cases. We'd typically go to Magento, and have built for that as well in the past. But I think one of Shopify's strongest points in this realm has been the accessibility of the admin, and actually making it easier for folks on the client side. A lot of our clients are building and making the goods that they sell, so they're doing their own manufacturing, et cetera. They really know the product, and they really want to be in the weeds managing it. Doing a lot of marketing, a lot of optimization, a lot of fulfillment logic, and that's really all facilitated more readily in Shopify by having a good admin UX. And in a lot of cases, we're also predominantly doing NetSuite as an ERP with Celigo. So that in a lot of cases, those products are being made in NetSuite and pushed to Shopify. And so we're doing data transforms on that, and it's worked really well at scale. I think we've seen really big, BFCM events or flash sale events and things where we've really had a lot of site traffic on a lot of different products and a lot of fulfillment happening at once, and it's all kind of scaled. So that's really one of the things I advise folks on when they're considering platforms, is saying, well, with Shopify, the platform can scale. It's there. The question is, for any platform, there's going to be limits to what you can do. Less so, of course, in open source, where you can kind of actually change the back end to suit. But it's just knowing about what the bounds of those limitations are. What are the gotchas? What are the things that might not be supported that well, or it might be an evolutionary process, or it might be something where we need to build a custom app or extension or something of that nature. But getting the benefits of having something that is more robust from a technical perspective with less work, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think that the way I think of it is Shopify gives you a lot of value right out of the box. Mm-hmm. And where you have to do an assessment of platform is if you're doing something that's beyond out of the box. And the trade-offs are, multi-tenant SaaS, which it has, a quicker development time, typically, a lower initial cost point, so you can get up and running faster. There might be some trade-offs in terms of when you start to customize it or when you start to scale. You have to look at the long-term costs of the SaaS platform. Whereas some of the open source platforms, if you know you're going to customize, there might be less friction in those initial phases, but then there might be also some more maintenance, and some people would argue less stability. I think that people make that argument, which is, I think, a fair argument to make. So I think what is interesting is that it's not necessarily a one size fits all, but it sounds to me like Shopify's done a really good job responding to the marketplace. So they had this really great out of the box solution. Okay, how can we make this a little bit better for some of these outlier needs or some of these more enterprise needs? And that since you've been in the game for a while, have you seen that happening over the last 10 years? Like, oh, we can do this now. What this was really hard to do before.
For sure. Yeah, I think, they're a developer-led company. The CEO, Toby Luke, is a programmer and, core contributor to Ruby. And that really informs their direction on how things are developed and why. And so very early on, Shopify decided, hey, we're not going to sort of do an Apple or a Microsoft where we squeeze out or acquire sort of competitors who have built solutions for our platform and sort of roll them into platform. They have built out a really robust system where the app ecosystem, in order to actually get some of these solutions done, is its own thing. They have a lot of APIs, right? They have a whole app store that they, as a sort of platform partner, send people to, and they said, hey, we're not going to do everything, but you can if you want to. And certainly there's a certain amount of gaps in that, of course. You can't do everything as you would with open source, and there's a certain amount of fear in terms of SaaS, being where you wake up one day and the price is double, or
right.
What you're able to do suddenly has changed. Like, here's the new feature that's out now and we didn't give you any warning, right, with some of the app partners and things like that. But in general, you have that a really great ability to have an extensible platform. So I think they've made decisions about, Shopify was never really intended for B2B, for instance, but you can certainly do a lot with it because of the way that you can interact with customer records, the way that you can customize things in a specific lane for shipping and fulfillment and so on. And so I think there's been shops like ours that have sort of maybe reverse engineered or sort of figured out what go around early on. And Shopify sort of noticed that and said, oh, wow, people are using this for this use case we didn't really think people would. And then lo and behold, 6 months later, some new feature in the API gets released. And I'm like, wow, the ability to, pull in meta fields here and manipulate them totally changes how we're able to, make this better, right?
Yeah.
So I think they're very nimble in that way, even though they are, pretty large at this point.
I think one of the other concerns with SaaS is that you're kind of letting a corporation own your data, and that data is on their servers, and you're having to share visibility with that corporation on your order flow and on your customer data.
True.
What I like to think, and I think there's a trend, particularly with AI coming, and encouragement that we're making, and I think kind of a best practice that's evolving in the industry, is to create proprietary data sets outside of that SaaS platform. So, that SaaS, that e-commerce head might only be part of your enterprise data. You might have data coming in through CRM, sales channels, ERP, suppliers. So you can always take that and create a separate database, and then run your own first-party data merged with stuff that's coming in through analytics and whatever's coming off of Shopify. Yeah. I think there's a lot of smart companies doing that. And what I like about Shopify is it gives you a very efficient, stable head on your e-commerce store. And even if you have all these other enterprise-level operations going on behind the scenes, it doesn't mean that Shopify isn't a good fit for you. It could be because it's satisfying one business requirement really well. And that doesn't mean you can't, for instance, throw up another open source platform just for some B2B self-service order flow. You can still keep your B2C front end on Shopify. And one thing that I would recommend, and it's one of those trade-offs, is the monolithic system versus the decoupled system, where you have, the advantage of the decoupled system is that you have different systems that you can fine tune as needed without creating downstream dependencies that might have conflicts, right? So you can get the most out of your Shopify front end, but you can still tweak your CRM or your B2B flows or something else, and then massage your data and your analytics on some backend server. But that only works if you're a certain size, right? So because that's some tech debt that you're building up, but it does have these this flexibility. And I think what I saw, and this was maybe one of the suspicions I had with Shopify, which sounds like you said that they aren't doing this, but I've seen this with other companies, is they want to be the all-in-one system. Like you're going to be your CRM. We're going to be your ERP. We're going to be your e-commerce front end. We're going to do all this. Don't worry. Everything's on one system. And when companies try to do that, I feel like they mess up. They sometimes under-deliver on that promise. And I think that the companies that are believing that and getting sold that, they sometimes get disappointed with the results a year later.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that's the dream, right? Is you don't have to maintain multiple systems. But I think Shopify does want to be that and do that for smaller scale businesses, the solopreneur to the 1 million a year. In theory, you shouldn't need more than, maybe a QBO integration or something, and then your 3PL is going to hook up. But they've also left that door open to really scale and say, we know you're probably going to need an ERP at some point, and you're going to be running multiple stores. Like, for instance, we oftentimes build separate Shopify stores for wholesale, and then they might sync to the same NetSuite account through two different connections, but we're not trying to do everything in one, and that's okay, and that's supported within a Plus pricing plan. And they've structured that, or localization where you have different types of stores for different regions, etc. But I do think they've been very true. They've bought a few apps here and there and kind of rolled those in, but very selectively, and have really publicly stated repeatedly, hey, we're going to support the app ecosystem, the partner ecosystem, the theming ecosystem, and we're not going to just claw that all back. Now the rev share might change, or the structure for partners might change, or the rules might change a bit, but I think that they realize that the strength in their growth is they've let people take those solutions and be more open than a typical managed platform.
Yeah.
But I do think there also are sort of enterprisey advantages to having a managed platform, like, PCI DSS compliance, and you want to do a one-click GDPR request?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Yeah, like that's possible, and you just don't worry about that compliance stuff because the compliance again is part of that service. So at scale, those type of things which seem kind of minor, like, oh, that's a nice to have, when you start getting into a certain realm, those are actually huge benefits,
Yeah.
right?
And it reduces a lot of risk for the merchant, because it's like, we've already thought through this. It's multi-tenant. You're very seldom going to come upon something that another Shopify merchant hasn't already seen or dealt with.
Yeah, and you can do data warehousing too. We've had folks who are sending stuff to Segment, integrated with HubSpot, again, NetSuite, other ERPs, Dynamics, and so forth, where one of the things we ask folks when we're in a replatforming situation is, well, what do you want to be the sort of master record, the main record that's going to be the be all end all? Do you want that to be your ERP, or do you want that to actually be Shopify? Like, where's the clean record? And different people have different opinions. I've talked to a lot of CFOs and lead accountants and stuff who actually, want essentially an air gap between sales records and Shopify and their accounting system, and they'd rather do daily or weekly reconciliations because they don't want every return cluttering up their transaction record in QuickBooks or something like that. So different people have different philosophies on actually how they want to sandbox or otherwise kind of control their data, because I think that's actually one of the things people don't talk about really enough right now is we're collecting as businesses so much data from so many people, and obviously there's different ethical and legal levels of that, a meta versus a small business, but it also creates this huge overwhelm of what do you actually do with it, and is anyone actually looking at it, right? And how do you parse that and process that and turn that into insights? And so one of the things that we've done is, since we also do marketing as well as Shopify design and development, is looking at how do we take out this first party data from Shopify and parse it in a meaningful way that we can actually get insights for clients and actually tell them, like, here's your user personas based on your first party data, or here's your churn analysis from your subscriptions, or here's what you need to know. Because otherwise people look at a bunch of reports and they're going to look at sales reports and pacing and trend lines and stuff, but it's not actually tapping the depth of that potential. And so I think with a lot of the ecosystem too is looking at how do we get more from the data and actually use it, rather than just sort of pay to store it someplace and never be able to leverage it.
Yeah. I also think Shopify's done an amazing job collaborating with their partners. Like, there's a lot of apps out there that do a lot of great work that I was thinking, like Klaviyo, where Klaviyo combined with, Shopify is really a good marriage of tech.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of done. I think it was like, avoiding the monolith. That's one way to do it, is that you establish really good partnerships and you let other companies specialize in components of this.
Yeah, because I think no matter, there is Shopify email. I guess they did kind of make us like competitor to it, but they actually have invested pretty heavily in Klaviyo as well, as a public company. But yeah, there's always going to be that we try to do everything for everyone, and you're just not going to be able to. Technically NetSuite has their own e-commerce engine in it, and it's horrific. But, in theory, someone's being sold that, hey, you can do everything in one. And when you have things like email, which has such nuanced compliance, again, in terms of sending and deliverability is really difficult, and supporting multi-devices and global CDNs, there's a lot going on. And yeah, Shopify has done that a little bit with Shopify email, though it's very rudimentary. But the reality is, someone who's trying to solve that problem with a big team of people doing so to do just that, I think the specialty will always win in terms of those features.
I totally agree with that. And have you had any experience? I know Shopify is making a big push on POS. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah. So in the first few years of POS, we were installing those in person for clients. We sort of stepped back from doing that so much anymore, but we do have clients who are in mixed retail situations. I would say of our clients who are also retailers with physical stores, maybe 25% have Shopify POS, even if Shopify is their main e-commerce platform. And there's various reasons for that. There's things that POS does not do well, which is, we work with some folks in specialty food, does not do any kind of deli counter, weight scale or dynamic pricing based on a variable like that. There's folks we have in jewelry who in theory could use it, but they're getting these data feeds from vendors in very specific CSV formats that need to be, again, sort of put in an ERP or put into a POS system that just aren't really viable with POS. I've done a lot of technical assessments of POSs in the market for even just more traditional kind of retailers, and there's definitely got you. One of the main things actually was kind of a pain point Shopify did address in their last POS update, which was they can now do offline transactions. Previously you needed an internet connection, whereas things like Square, you could lose your Wi-Fi signal or you could lose your cell signal and it would just temporarily dun the card and then run it later. So things like that, depending on the context. I do have a bunch of cases of folks who are using it for trade shows and pop-ups and things like that, where they might still have another sort of more enterprise grade POS for their high volume retail locations, but they're doing trade shows and they want to put in deposits and orders and things. They just want that iPad on the road and they're going and seeing 500 people a day. It does really well for those kind of edge cases as well.
So what do you, in the ecosystem, the Shopify ecosystem as a partner, what are you seeing that's on the horizon? Do you see anything that you're excited about, or do you feel like there's some stuff coming that you'll have to learn about, or you want to be able to mention it to your clients?
Yeah, for sure. The last update they did, they titled the boring update, which was the winter update. So very iterative, very sort of back of house cleanup kind of stuff, which I'm sure is necessary, but wasn't a lot to report back. They do have their, I guess now annual developer conference in Toronto at the end of May. I'll be at Shopify Editions, and that I think is where all the sort of dog and pony show and the splash will be in terms of new features. There's certainly been a lot of development of features in Plus. We work predominantly with, but not exclusively with, Plus clients. And so working with checkout optimization, customization, what you can do in terms of integrating across apps that are already doing other things with the interactivity between, I think, apps in checkout is vastly improved, and what you can do, there's some new things opening up in there that we've kind of scratched the surface of. And yeah, I think for us, what we're looking forward to in the year is really doing CRO, revenue optimization, conversion optimization, more testing. And so I think also there's some new testing platforms, heat mapping software, et cetera, that we're looking to make really incremental but impactful changes on all of the client sites that we have to date, and then looking at sort of the learnings from those to then make those into best practices and so forth. And so I think there's been an evolution in terms of what we would consider our app stack. So we sort of vet everything that we work with and say, like, this one's reliable, this one has good support, this one has poor support, this one is more affordable than the other one, or something changed and this isn't viable anymore. I'm very careful about dependencies because while it's great that Shopify has this robust app ecosystem, you could have apps that are built in Ukraine or Australia or Canada or Japan or wherever, and those folks might just be paying for servers in their home locales. And so looking at site speed, looking at dependencies, what happens if it goes down? Does this pull down, checkout, et cetera? I think one of the things that new folks to Shopify do is they just go through and install everything because it's like, oh, it's solving all these problems. I don't need a developer. And then you end up with just massive site speed issues or massive conflicts. And so I think as we move into this world where we look at Shopify as a core base that's very extensible, you also need to be careful about how that's happening. And again, what is the best way to actually accomplish that? We are, I think, getting to the point with also some of the sort of value-based SaaS pricing models where it's potentially cheaper to, build a private custom app than it is to use something off the shelf. Usually the value proposition there is like, well, it's going to take more dev time to actually, again, try to solve a problem from scratch than to use something that's off the shelf. But I'm seeing a lot of SaaS folks coming into Shopify saying, oh, we're going to take up, only 0.5% of your revenue or 1% of your revenue until you get to this plan where there's no rev share. And it's like, well, that's not a viable thing to use at scale, right? So we're seeing, more opportunities for maybe custom development as SaaS gets kind of stratospheric.
Yeah, the rev share issue I know is a big deal with wholesale. Like when the margins are so thin, that's where like the open source model plus the order flow sometimes comes as order requests, and they do ACH transactions and purchase orders. So there's not even a credit card transaction happening.
Right. Yeah.
And then so pricing out the SaaS platform becomes tricky. And then also, some of those orders are basically proprietary. So there's not like a set, that's some of the mentality, I think, on the wholesale side, which is probably a challenge for Shopify. But I want to get back to the Shopify Plus because the pluses, like you were talking about heat mapping and, optimizations and kind of getting a best in class e-commerce experience. To me, if you're a startup or a B2C, there's no one that can really compete in that space with Shopify. Shopify is basically winning that battle.
Yeah.
So right out of the gate for a very small amount of time and resources. I mean, like people just do it themselves too. You're getting an incredibly high value e-commerce platform. And I still think that, I don't see anyone really getting into Shopify's domain of expertise on that front. But I think it's also interesting to hear what some of the more enterprise level solutions are. And, some of those pluses on the Shopify side, like you were saying, they continue to scale with the business. So if it works at 2 million, it's going to work at 20 million. The value prop's still the same, right?
Yeah, and that's the really cool thing is we work with clients who started at maybe $1 million revenue a year and now are 10, 15 or more. And we didn't replatform them. We didn't even necessarily retheme them unless it was for branding initiative or there was, core technical dependency we're getting over or something like that. I mean, the DevOps they've created is pretty understated, but it's really quite impressive. And yeah, I think BigCommerce was trying to go after Shopify's launch for a bit, but I have so far replatformed everyone in Shopify that ever got built on BigCommerce that I've worked with, because I warned them. I said, hey, this is probably not going to scale that well. The app ecosystem isn't there. The DevOps are not as good. The pricing is way more variable. So we had folks that had their plans double with no warning and things of that nature. And I think the templating structure is similar. It's built on Liquid also, but it is just way messier. So not that there also can't be others that are coming out in the future. I'm sure there's going to be folks looking after Shopify's market share and trying to get a piece of it. But as of yet, I haven't seen something that is truly as competitive as it should be.
Yeah. I think some of Shopify's, the benefits are also some of its, some of the problems with the platform. Like not, like I said, Shopify is amazing. I think you can do almost anything on it. The big commerce I've seen that where they play really well is in regulated industries. They made a lot of headway in that, and so is Shopware. But and then there's the old dog Magento. But so on the wholesale side, do you have any examples? Because we're trying to gear some of some of the conversations on this podcast about B2B.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any specific case studies that you can mention
Sure.
that are in Shopify?
Yeah, I think the most successful wholesale solutions we built for Shopify have been for our clients that are designing and making their goods. So some of our clients actually, though they have a nice looking D2C site, 80% of their business is wholesale, and they're really well distributed, and so they're doing huge POs, and that's really the bread and butter. And the D2C is kind of either proof of concept or showcasing and showrooming, but not actually what the core of the business is. So there's always a lot of very specific logic for wholesale in my experience. I think every business owner thinks that the way that they do business is the way that everyone should do it, or is the most intuitive thing ever. And you're like, actually, I've never heard of anyone needing this support for this thing. Like, I don't think the solution exists for that, like anywhere, right? But it seems very intuitive to them because of how they're back in the setup, right? So it's really trying to figure out that. We've done a lot of logic with, order minimums, sometimes order maximums, intake flows for signups, case packs, and per product requirements.
And you can still manage all that stuff in the ERP and just flow it through Celigo into Shopify.
Yeah, depending on the structure, again, it's just where that data is stored. So it could be a tag or a meta field, could be created in NetSuite or an ERP and pushed in. Sometimes we've had cases where we will manage or map all of the ERP's characteristics to meta fields, but then Shopify manages tags. And so we do different things for front end with tagging, and the client knows, and we know that if we do anything with tagging, we're just affecting front end, we're not affecting their product data, right? Or it's not getting overwritten. If we need to add something for a logic reason for theming, it's not going to get written over by the next push from the ERP that's going to wipe stuff out. So you also need to figure out what are your lanes going to be for data integrity. And multiple tiering and pricing. I think the big thing Shopify did for B2B that wasn't supported before was customer account types and groups. Right. So there's definitely, hey, if you're selling to a national chain, they don't have one buyer. They have a whole bunch of buyers, and those buyers need rules because one store might have a different tax structure, different minimum requirements, different pricing structure, or map rules, or whatever that might be, right? So that was definitely a big gain from Shopify's own feature offering for B2B that I think was in beta a couple of years ago and has been out for a little more than a year at this point. There's still some rough edges. Like I think it was maybe 3 months ago that you could customize. It was more than the font and the color of the B2B order flow in terms of the customer account logins and stuff like that. That to me was a major oversight on their part and took a long time for them to develop for some reason. I'm not sure why. And that was actually a reason why some of our clients didn't use Shopify's own B2B features. So like we can't have people logging in like this, and they just sort of decided, hey, we're going to go passwordless, and it's the UX is going to look nothing like the rest of your site or brand and so forth. So now they finally released a sort of light API to do that. So there's some aspects where again there's going to be these gotchas and things that are not quite perfect, but in general. And net billing, payment terms has gotten better. You could always sort of do it through an app, but to a certain extent, and not in the way that maybe the accountants might like. So those options have gotten much better. But draft orders are very powerful, and I think there's been a lot of SaaS companies that have figured out clever things to do with draft orders to make customizations as well for those very unique cases where you need to essentially have people order something that becomes a custom product, or we have clients who support customization, personalization, engraving, laser etching, embroidery, things of that nature for wholesale as well, which is definitely a lot of setup, but it is viable on Shopify.
Yeah, there's in the B2B space, there's a lot of configurator stuff. So it's like, I need to have this part made. That's on the
right.
Yeah, on the manufacturer side. We've seen there's a lot of different solutions out there. But anyway, the point being is, if you need to have a hybrid e-commerce experience, you need to have some B2B. Don't exclude Shopify from your research. It might be a very viable option for you, and you'll get the benefits of Shopify SaaS on the B2C for sure. But if you work with someone like Hidden Gears and Paolo, they can help you talk through where the landmines are, or lack thereof, particularly as things evolve. Like you were saying, releases come out every year, so there could be stuff coming that you don't even know about, or it's already there. So Paolo, wrapping this up, thanks for the chat, by the way. That was super helpful and informative. How can people find you on the internets?
Sure. Our website's at hiddengears.com. We're also doing a bunch on LinkedIn. You can find me on X, Paolo Robot, and feel free to drop a line. We're always happy to chat with people and hear about interesting challenges that you have. We've been a Shopify partner and expert since those programs were invented. So, we've gone down a lot of roads with a lot of folks, and are always happy to give some, free advice if we know something off the top of our heads or whatever. And really appreciate the opportunity and chatting with you. It's always great to dig into the technical aspects of, trying to help folks run their business in the best way that they can, and figuring out all the creative ways to do that. So.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have a lot of experience too, solving problems on that platform. So it can't hurt to reach out to Paolo anytime you are considering Shopify, or maybe you just are stuck and you need someone to help you get unstuck, or need an integration done. Hidden Gears, Paolo, they've been in the industry for a long time, and I really appreciate you taking time today to talk to us. Again, signing off, this is Matt Harris with Verado. Thank you for listening to the Verado podcast. You can find it anywhere you find podcasts. That's VARATO. Have a good day.